Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Book Leads Impactful Books for Life and Leadership. I'm your series host and leadership performance coach, John Jaramillo. This podcast series is about getting to the books that have impacted the lives of the people in my network. So these are great leads to get to the books that I'll be interviewing them on, the books that have provided them the greatest insights, the greatest knowledge that's impacted their lives, their work, their business, whatever it may be, whether they're the author of the book or not. And in this series, I cover 3 categories of books. The first category, where we cover a book that they're sharing with me I haven't read. Second category, where we're covering a book we've both read, whether specifically for the series or we read it before the series even existed. The third category is when I get to talk to an author and or publisher about the book, to give it a face, to give it a tone, to give it some stories, some backstory, some stories on experience to really show where it is that book came from. And my guest today is Sophia Elan. And Sophia is a former corporate lawyer turned wellness advocate and multi-genre author. And she's on a mission to inspire and empower others to live happier, healthier, and more fulfilling lives. After conquering complex PTSD, she centered her life around passion, purpose, and pleasure. A passionate advocate of self-care and Mediterranean living, she shares her insights and journey through her writing and Mediterranean Me lifestyle brand. Sophia has authored over a dozen books, including an uplifting memoir, a holistic wellness KISS, Keep It Simple Sweetheart collection, and a multi-part Mediterranean-based Happily Ever Now series inspired by her life. She's a HeartMath Certified Coach and is creating a nonprofit, GiGi's Angels, to raise awareness for mental health and cardiovascular health. Most recently from Napa, California, Sophia, a frequent contributor to International Living, which is a premier magazine and publication, has lived throughout the Mediterranean for the last 2 decades, and she encourages all of us to embrace life with a curious spirit and an open heart. Sophia, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
So, Sophia, who are you today? It's a great bio, rich history. Who are you today in terms of the work you're doing in the day-to-day? What does that look like? Just so we get a sense of who's sharing the book that we're going to cover with us.
So as you said, I'm a multi-genre author, and I have over 12 books right now. What I'm working on primarily is finishing my Mediterranean-based novel series, The Happily Ever Now. I'm about to finish my 6th, and actually I write out of order. I write across different countries. So I have Sicily, and then I have Turkey, where I was based pretty much for the past 7 years, and then Spain, France, Greece, Montenegro, and then ending up in Italy. And so I wrote like the first, the 4th, the 2nd, so I have to finish the 3rd. So that's my priority right now. And I am just recently starting, launching the not-for-profit, which is near and dear to my heart. Basically think of myself as a heart coach. And by that, I primarily mean teaching heart coherence as well as heart awareness. I want people to become heart smart. Cardiovascular disease is responsible for the most deaths globally. It's the #1 killer of men and women and most ethnicities in the United States. And the excellent news is that like 90% of that plus is preventable, according to the American Heart Association, with modifiable risk factors.
Yeah.
So, and I see that, we increasingly have kind of a stress epidemic, and I see a collision course between chronic stress and increased cardiovascular disease risk, because stress amplifies pretty much all of those modifiable risk factors. And it's a shame because, we need to take charge of our lives and really first understand, through education, what those risk factors are, and then empower people by simple, accessible ways that they can change those. As you mentioned, I have a holistic wellness guide series, and that's called KISS, because my approach is keep it simple, sweetheart, because I want holistic wellness to be accessible to everyone. And the great thing about heart coherence is that we all have a heart, and it's amazing. I think that we think of our brains kind of as command central, top down, and we have a bidirectional communication between our brains and our heart. And 80% plus of the information that's going, along that communication line is from the body, primarily the heart to the brain. So by learning heart coherence techniques, we can really optimize our physiology, and it has amazing, amazing benefits, including reduced stress and anxiety and blood pressure, things that feed into cardiovascular risk, as well as improved cognitive functioning, really facilitating it actually switches us from going from our sympathetic nervous state, fight or flight, to parasympathetic, which a lot of people need that nowadays because a lot of us are stuck in fight or flight. So it's a way, it's actually called, we think of, we hear a lot about gut health and gut brain, but the heart also has its own independent system to where it's a heart brain.
It's incredible how health, I mean, I've always been somebody admittedly who's been overweight, always, right? But it's incredible how health, the conversation around health has shifted. We're talking about the physiological here, how it shifted from when I was younger, and it was the main thing that they would look at was your weight, right? And they knew, I mean, this is in the 80s. They're still smoking in restaurants at that point, right? But the main thing was your weight. But how different it is now, where it's like, it goes beyond that. It's not just, that's not the only marker. Not that that was the only marker back then, but that was like the main one that people were focused on. But now it's like, okay, even if you are in average shape, you're at your weight or around where you're supposed to be, that doesn't mean internally that everything is on the up and up. That doesn't mean that you're taking yourself, because I have so many relatives that they look at them, they're not overweight, but they're in worse shape than I am because they're not taking care of themselves in other ways.
Yeah, and I'm actually a prime example of that. And, you know, I intimately understand the ravages of chronic stress, both from a lifetime of various traumas that, you know, run the gamut, as well as just occupational stress from, you know, a lot of pressure. The legal industry in particular, I'm just recently finding really has a lot of issues with chronic stress and, you know, burnout and substance abuse and suicide, quite frankly. So I'm someone who, since childhood, had a lot of psychosomatic illnesses. I have been misdiagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis as a child, with multiple sclerosis as an adult, esophagitis, food allergies. I was told I needed back surgery, and absolutely nothing was wrong with me. It was all psychosomatic. I just had to take control, you know, learn how to manage that chronic stress and resolve my unresolved traumas. And that's really what impassioned me to write, because it took me, you know, decades to get to the realization that I couldn't just repress that stuff. I couldn't suppress it. I had to hit it head on. And I delved into, I have a master's degree in natural health, but I really delved into just passionately researching everything I could about holistic wellness. And as I was doing that, first, you know, for my own healing, it just really struck me how chronic stress impacts, like you just mentioned, weight. You know, there's a significant contributory factor in chronic stress to, you know, excess weight. And I think that a lot of people just, they aren't focused on it. As a society, we're dismissive of it. Like 80% plus of office visits have a stress component, and yet no one treats us for that stress at the doctor's office. You know, we might get Xanax for anxiety. Mood disorders and digestive disorders usually go hand in hand. We'll probably be given, you know, a drug for our digestive issues, and no one's actually addressing the underlying cause. And it's funny when you said that, you'd get your weight taken, and that was one of the primary focuses growing up. You know, I don't know if you remember, I haven't been to a doctor in years. I don't even know if they still do it, but where they, stick a wooden tongue depressor in your mouth and have you go, that's actually to, kind of give an indication of your vagal tone, your vagus nerve status, which, I never knew that for all those years, and no one tells you what they're looking for or what the result of it is. Yeah. So I think that we have to start taking charge of our own lives, be our own health advocates. I mean, I'm my own nutritionist, doctor, therapist, I'm my own health insurance. And I just really want people to realize that the vast majority of chronic diseases are lifestyle related and they're preventable. And so I really want to inspire, from my history, and educate and empower people to take control of their health and of their destinies. Yeah.
Yeah, that's huge, because I think we may have seen health for so long as something that it was somebody else's job to do, to look out for, your doctor. They're the ones that were in charge of taking all your vitals, taking all these measurements, looking at you at the chart, seeing what is off, taking your blood, seeing what was off, and then making suggestions, and then you leaving the building. And if it happened, it happened. If they didn't, it didn't.
Right.
But now it's kind of like we do have to look at the body as as hokey as it sounds, a temple. That's your investment. That's your, you're only going to get the ROI. And that's just the way I think of it is the better you treat it, the more you put in quality foods, the more you're going to get out of it. There's certain things that are out of our control, but I think looking at it that way, and I've had some people on here that have spoken about their health issues and being their own advocate and so on and so forth. Hopefully we can get to that point where we see our bodies as a temple, we respect it, and it's on us. Not just waiting for that 1 or 2 time a year visit with a doctor when something's wrong, but we're kind of investing in it outside of that it's just common practice, that it's the same as putting on your pants or putting on your glasses, brushing your teeth.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, it truly is an investment. And I always like to say, if you want a healthy life, you need to have healthy lifestyle factors. And I think the sad thing is that most of us associate disease, with aging, and we think that diseases are inevitable consequences from aging. And first of all, that's not true. And second of all, most of these diseases start, way earlier in life, and we need to be proactive at a much earlier age. And it's just a tragedy how many kids now, have obesity, have diabetes, have stress, have suicidal, ideations. And I think that, if nothing else, we owe it to the children to help them feel like they can understand. And there's so much information out there. And that's a big reason why I tell people that they need to be a proponent of their own health, because so many people are just blindly listening to social influencers who have a lot of followers, even if they don't have qualifications, references, or even relevant life experience. And for my books, like one of my books is on weight, or a couple of my books are on weight loss. One of them is called Eat the Cupcake. And I have 100 pages of references in there. And, if something doesn't make sense that someone says, then, you owe it to yourself to delve into it a little bit. Nowadays, there's so much excellent information out there, but we shouldn't just be blindly following what anybody says, especially if it's counterintuitive, if it doesn't gel with our own, circumstances or our goals. And so I think that people just need to realize that they can find really good information and be empowered that most of these things are preventable through honest to God, simple lifestyle modifications. People seem to overcomplicate things by supposedly looking for a quick fix.
Yeah. I mean, it's like everything, instant gratification. We're not trained for the long haul. We're not trained to experiment at all.
That's an excellent point.
I talk about that all the time. Like, we went through education. It was just kind of like, here's what you need to know. This is what we're going to test you on. You meet that marker, you move to the next grade. That's it. But it was and here's gym class. We're going to take your BMI. We're going to see how many sit-ups you can do. We're going to see how many push-ups you can do. But no one tells you, never in all those instances of all of that across whatever grades did anybody say, and it just wasn't the mentality at that time, that there's a reason that we should do this.
Oh my gosh, growing up,
no one ever said, this is why we're doing this.
Yep.
I don't even know why. Why do you have gym? Just so you can check off a box that says we keep them active. And I'm not talking about nowadays, but back when I was growing up, because there was no, okay, what is this a means to? If we don't do this, if you're not able to do this, if you're not able to run the mile, in whatever time, this is what can happen later in life. This is what your body's all about. This is how you should treat your body to try to stay healthy, dude. There was none of that. It was just metrics, and that was it.
Yeah, I actually, growing up, I abhorred physical education. And to your point, I've actually never actually heard anyone else say that before. I wish that they had taught more, why we're doing it, the importance of it, the consequences that can happen if not, and also just make it more freestyle. So if you're not a great, baseball player, you're not going to be stressed about taking your team down, or like I hate it when they would pick teams. And I wish it wasn't just physical education. I wish it was, holistic wellness education. Also talking about nutrition. I wish stress management would be taught. So it's no wonder that we're kind of in the circumstances that we are today.
Absolutely,
because, as you said, we don't get that grounding, which is so fundamental. And I think increasingly people are more interested in holistic wellness. But again, I think that, you can't outsource it. You have to really take control of it and pick and choose where you get your information, but don't just adhere to it because someone with a lot of followers tells you to do that.
Yeah. So Sophia, when it comes to your work as a coach, what does that look like? Is that one-on-one? Is it facilitations? Is it group coaching? Can you just give a breakdown of the kind of programming that you offer as a coach?
So I have my HeartMath certification, which is from the HeartMath Institute. That right now is for one-on-one coaching or up to groups of 6, which I actually like very much because there's something, called co-regulation. We actually mirror each other's neurons. We mirror each other's energy. Everyone says misery loves company. I like to say happiness loves company. And so I like to be in a small, intimate setting to where, my vibe can translate to the other people, and so that I can feel where their energy is. And, down the road, I think I will expand it for other certifications, but I particularly like that approach now. And so I offer different modules. The fundamentals of it, really is the heart coherence training, because there are a lot of different techniques, some particularly more applicable than others. It's not just for physiology, it's also for cognitive enhancement and optimizing performance. So even better relationships, emotional regulation and listening skills, which would also apply to like negotiating for lawyers, etc. So I have a number of modules that are pretty much tied on teaching the heart coherence, which again, I think is transformative for everyone. And since everyone has a heart, they are super simple techniques. They're deceptively simple. And once you learn those, then you have that going forward through the rest of your life. And it can really, really impact you and enhance your holistic wealth. And then I also have other modules focusing on, for instance, stress nutrition. One of the things that drives me nuts, especially in the United States, is the monomaniacal fixation on weight loss as opposed to having a healthy life with the side benefit of having a healthy weight. Because I think increasingly people would rather starve themselves or, exclude whole groups of macronutrients. And, macronutrients by definition are the nutrients that we need in relatively large quantities. And my big concern is when we're wholesale dispensing with one group of macronutrients, we're losing micronutrients, which that impacts our cardiovascular health, our brain health, our energy, our vitality, our longevity, et cetera, and our gut health, because, we don't have the diversity. And I've really been blessed to spend so much time in different cultures and see different perspectives and see how people live. And it really gives me kind of a more of an objective view of what's happening in the United States. And I actually hesitated writing books on weight loss because my point is, let's have a healthy overall lifestyle, which all of my recommendations are tied to that. And even things like, I know people who would rather, eat the bare minimum or practically starve themselves instead of moving. And movement is integral. Everyone who is blessed with mobility should be moving every day, not just for weight loss. I do it for my mental health. I can't function if I don't do something. And people, I think, seem to think that it's not exercise unless they're doing something really intense. And it's not about the intensity, it's the consistency. And we have so many gyms in the United States, and I spend most of my time in other countries, and gyms, quite frankly, are a rarity. It's more than just the natural day-to-day, whether it's doing things like gardening and walking to the store. We all drive cars in the United States. No one seems to want to walk anywhere, or it's, the pre-dinner walk or the after-dinner walk, getting together with friends, etc. And again, I think that we tend to complicate things by trying to oversimplify things, whereas I really do think if we just take simple daily steps, your health is a lifelong journey. It's not something you do for a 2-week program or you take one pill and that's that.
Or the New Year's resolution where the gyms are packed for a month and a half and then February it just drops off.
Yes. And
Sophia,
again,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, again, I think that people feel like they need to, run a marathon or do this, that, and the other. And that can be, paralyzing or overwhelming. And it just doesn't have to be that way. It's like I said, it's deceptively simple.
Yeah. I mean, just a quick example on that. The only thing that works when it's kind of like, okay, I want to feel better. I want to look better. I want to feel better in my clothes. The thing that works best is the bike for me. Mm-hmm. That's accessible, that I have it in the basement. I can put on a movie or whatever and work out while I'm doing it. And the thing is, instead of going, 50 minutes, 55 minutes, an hour, like I used to back in the day, now it's like 5 times a week. And there's other stuff I do, walk with the family and whatnot, 5 times a week, like 35 minutes.
And
So
that's
instead
exactly,
of
yes,
so
that's the
instead of
recommendation.
doing 5 times a week at 1 hour and burning out and getting sick of it because I don't want to sit there for an hour, it's kind of like, all right, 35 minutes I know is all I need. 5 times a week, that's my threshold in addition to other things. Again, it's like anything else in life where it's like the instant gratification kills us.
Yeah.
Because
And
we don't have the patience to make the little incremental changes, the micro habit changes to get there eventually and train ourselves and program ourselves to live a certain way. It's kind of like we all want just that instant gratification, that instant success.
right. And I mean, health is a lifelong journey. And you know, what you just said makes perfect sense. And that's the recommendation. It really is just 150 minutes a week of moderate, intense exercise. And instead of, being a weekend warrior, or like you said, either get bored or burnt out or injured,
Yeah.
when people try to do things intensely. I mean, I would never run personally, unless someone's running after me or I'm running after them. I mean, I walk. And since I travel so much, I'm really into strength training, but like a lot of the times I'm literally using water bottles that I fill up with water. I don't even have weights. I don't belong to a gym. And I'm so determined, again, to make holistic wellness more accessible. So I don't want, if you can't afford a trainer or go to a gym or have a nutritionist, it shouldn't be a luxury. It should be available to everyone. Whether it's an expensive diet pill or an expensive supplement, et cetera. I mean, like a lot of the stuff that I do, even, in the Mediterranean, like teas, I do, tea cocktails all day long because they have incredible benefits with our herbal teas. We don't have to rely on prescriptions. One of my upcoming books is Hugs, Not Drugs, because I think, we're really missing the boat, and we're numbing the symptoms instead of going to the root cause of it. And by doing that, we're just exacerbating the issues.
Yeah.
It's not the right solution.
Sophia, so when it comes to you getting to this point, what's your story in terms of, I like to go back to when my guest was maybe leaving high school, entering the workforce, really starting their work path, not necessarily knowing that this is where they were going to end up. But what does that look like for you? What did that path look like to now?
Yeah, actually, it's an excellent question because mine has come full circle for sure. When I was growing up, and I didn't even really remember it. I had, my best friends from that time tell me, because I didn't think anything was ever going to happen. I really wanted to travel, and I literally didn't remember that. And now, that's basically a large integral part of my life. I thought I was going to be a teacher. I love kids. I wanted to teach or be a psychologist. I enjoyed my creative writing class, and I had a teacher who was very complimentary and encouraging, but at the time, never in my wildest imagination would I have thought of it as a career path, because I didn't have enough self-esteem to think that anyone would want to read what I would write. So that never entered my head. And, I was a people pleaser, always looking for external validation. I wanted to make my parents proud. My older sister was going to become a lawyer, and she didn't go down that path. And so I kind of inherited that. So I became a lawyer, and at first I thought I was going to be like helping the underdog and, have it be personally fulfilling, not just financially rewarding. And it didn't turn out to be, what I really wanted to do. And I went through a really bad divorce, and my ex at the time sought permanent alimony, and I had a visceral reaction. I said, okay, I'm out of here, I'm moving. And I had spent a lot of time in Argentina with one of my jobs for mergers and acquisitions, and had just fallen in love with the culture and the country. And so initially I moved there, and then I started pursuing my actual passions in life, both the travel as well as natural health. So I got the master's in natural health and did different ISO fitness and nutrition certificates, and I'm pretty introverted. So I started writing because I'm more of a behind, the scenes kind of person. So I wanted to help people that way. And I was in Turkey, and it was during COVID, and I was writing about holistic wellness. My brand is called Mediterranean Me. And I was feeling hypocritical because I realized that I wasn't as healthy as I could be. I had, puzzling behaviors, et cetera. And I realized it was because I needed to resolve my unresolved traumas. And so that's what made me put the holistic wellness on pause. And then that's what caused me to do my memoir. And then researching in connection with my healing, that's when I really got the appreciation for how devastating chronic stress is. And that's what had me, segue then into doing the holistic wellness guides. I have a couple on weight loss and one on stress and one on brain health. And I have like endless books in me. And then the memoir is, it's an uplifting book, but it is raw and it is vulnerable. And so a few years ago, I was reading, I think it was in The Guardian, an article, and someone had asked artificial intelligence, like, hey, give me the plot for an Oscar-winning movie. And whatever came up, a friend had sent it to me, because whatever came up, they're like, this is your life. And so I said, maybe I'll write a more kind of lighter version of my healing journey. And that's what prompted me to do the Mediterranean-based Happily Ever Now series, because it's significantly based on my life. And I was also very interested in not only exposing people to, different lessons that I had learned, different insights, but also just a lot of Mediterranean gems that aren't very well known. I tend to gravitate towards the hidden places. And I just fell in love with the Mediterranean lifestyle and the culture, and really wanted to share that with others.
So Sophia, when it comes to you I mentioned it in the bio, your PTSD, where does that stem from? How did that come to be?
So the husband that I mentioned, who had sought permanent alimony, he was a very materialistic, greedy person. And that's part of the reason why I practiced law for as long as I did, because to satisfy his desires in terms of, external possessions and money, etc. And I had always wanted to work for a charity. I wanted to have children. And it just got to the point where I finally said, okay. And I separated, and he tried to kill me because he didn't want to be separated from that income stream. And then in connection with that, and at the time I was kind of like, oh, c'est la vie, things happen. And I had, best friends from childhood who said, you need to go to therapy. And in connection with those sessions, I started uncovering childhood abuse. And my realizations when I was in Turkey, when I said I started writing and healing myself, is because I realized that I had a cyclical pattern of really bad relationships. And again, I had always just treated them like, things happen. And I realized that I had to turn inwards. I never, blamed the other person. I just thought it was happenstance. And it was a definite aha moment when I realized that our subconscious is responsible for like 95% of our thoughts, our beliefs, and our behaviors. And so I needed to tap into that to finally resolve those things so I could truly move on fully from my past and make it history, not the story of my life. So I like to say, like, I authored my life, and that my husband trying to kill me is what actually catapulted me to truly living an authentic life.
It's incredible how that happens. Excuse me, how so many of my guests, we talk about our traumas, big T, little t, disruptions, however you want to speak of them, but how those instances catapulted them to what they're doing now.
Yes. And, and I even broaden it to, not just trauma, but to chronic stress, because, and all of us who have traumas have chronic stress, but pretty much everybody has chronic stress, and we aren't taught how to manage it. We're dismissive of it. It's kind of like a badge of honor to not sleep enough and to be stressed, burning the candle at both ends, et cetera. And, it can really change your life. And it's crazy to me how impactful the beliefs that are instilled in us, programmed in us as children, how that affects us, for decades. And if we're not even aware of it, we're not going to change that. And so I think that, that needs to be taught too, for people to become more self-aware. If people are exhibiting behaviors that they don't want to, excess eating, excess drinking, drugs, gambling, hoarding, shopping, low self-esteem, people pleasing, those things are impacting us on a daily basis, holistically.
Yeah. It's incredible. Just alluding back to what I spoke about before, where, we go through all this schooling and we think that's the preparation, and it's going to prepare you for a career and survival and sustaining. It's like, but we don't talk about the emotional. We don't talk about the mental game. The mental game in terms of, information, knowledge, to get the degree, to do the work, sure. But everything else that comes with living with life. I don't like to say coping, because it's going to be there regardless. It's not something that's infiltrating. It's just, it's there. but we're not taught how to live and how to manage our emotions or anything like that. So I think just seeing, I have, a 3-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 9-year-old. I see the way that they're talking to kids. I see the programming that they have for kids that is speaking to, based on where they are in grade level. There's more as they get older, but they start talking about different emotions. So first, how to identify these four. As they get older, what about these? So I like that they're doing that, because until you get to that point where you're helping somebody manage their bodies, their emotions, their minds, and not just pumping them with information, you're just creating little soldiers to send out into the world.
That's a good way of looking at it. And I think that so many of us think that our thoughts are largely dictating everything, where it's emotions. And that's the thing with heart coherence. It's a recognition that our emotions are really, running the show. And a lot of us aren't even aware of where those came from. And one of the things I love about your podcast, I mean, books can change lives. I mean, not only are they one of life's simple pleasures, but they can change lives. And, just like we were talking about outsourcing our health, to the conventional doctor, a lot of people do that with their mental health. I know people who have been in therapy for years, and, to each his or her own, and everyone's healing journey is going to be different, but, it's kind of implies that it's not working if it's going on for decades. And we have to take, ownership of it. And, books were hugely instrumental for my healing, both in terms of information as well as, inspiration and insights. And that's largely, I had a couple of conventional psychotherapy sessions, and then I did craniosacral therapy, which was amazing and transformative. But again, wanting things to be accessible, I think that there are, just basically through books and self-awareness, and then insights and inspiration from others, that people can really heal themselves. They don't have to, conventional therapy is expensive. They don't have to be on Xanax and Valium for the rest of their lives, because, and I was on those for a little bit, and I was like, I hated this, because yes, it was numbing the pain, but it was numbing the pleasure too. It was just numbing. And I'm a person who's full of zest in life, and I'm like, this is not the way to go.
Yeah. And this is no condemnation of therapy. You said so yourself. No judgment. Everybody has their own thing. Everybody has their own way of dealing with it, healing it, whatever it may be. This is no judgment on anybody doing that. But I only chuckled a couple minutes ago when you were talking about therapy, because a friend of mine, one of my best friends, they tell me about their therapy. And the thing is, like, the last 5 years, right, since COVID really, the talk on mental health has spoken up, has peaked, right? Or not peaked, but it's getting there. People are speaking more about going to therapy. That's great. Like, somebody can bring up that they went to therapy and nobody bats an eye. It's just, I was talking to my therapist, and no one even flinches or blinks. Whereas in the past, it would have been like, whoa. But what was interesting that you said, and that's when I chuckled, was one of my best friends, and they tell me about their therapist, and, I've been with them for, 20 years. I love them.
Yes.
I'm like, and I've told her this. So it's not like I'm throwing her under the bus now, but I've told her this specifically. It's like, wait, what? 20 years? Like, maybe it's time to switch it up. Like, how is, I don't know. I've never been to therapy. I'd love to go. I no judgment at all, but I told him, I'm like, how is this? Is that a thing? Like, you're supposed to be with somebody for 20 years. At what point, and everybody's different, everybody has their own thing, but at what point do you kind of take the tools? And there are going to be instances where maybe you have to come back, something happened, something happens that triggers you, and support is fine. I'm all for that. But at what point do you kind of take the tools and then move on to kind of grow beyond that? So that was the only, it's not that I disrespect therapy at all. That was the only reason I chuckled, like I said,
that. To each his or her own.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like the craniosacral therapy, I'm a huge proponent of, because I didn't believe in it at the time. Now I understand how it works. And so I completely agree with it. But I think that it's just the same as we said about doctors. Like, you go for a biannual checkup and you think everything's good. You go to a weekly or a monthly therapy session and you think, okay, that's it. You don't have to do the work on your own. And it's the deep inner work that is actually what I think is what's going to, stop you from having to go to someone else's therapy, or, continue working on yourself all the time. And, writing, I had always been leery about doing anything like journaling. And I thought, oh, I don't want to wallow in this stuff. I'm just going to be reliving it, which is what I think a lot of talk therapy is. But writing, it's different because you actually get it out on paper and it, you kind of dilute it and you work your way through it. It helps you process it. And, writing was extraordinarily cathartic for me. And I think that, putting pen to paper really makes you delve deep. One of the things that drives me nuts on social media is, I've had a rainbow of narcissistic relationships throughout my life. And, there's so much anger and belligerence about the narcissists. And people have to realize that, if you're repeatedly in those kinds of relationships, what's the common denominator, which is what I realized. It was me. And so I needed to turn inwards because and again, narcissists, they've been through trauma too. I think everyone deserves compassion, but if you want to truly heal, you can't always be looking outside of you. You need to look inside. There's a quote I have throughout my memoir. Don't blame the clowns for being clowns. Ask why you keep going to the circus, which is exactly what I was doing. You
know how many people I'm going to say that to from now on? Like those people that, it's these perpetual situations that they put themselves in. And listen, what's great about this whole conversation about mental health is that a lot of my friends have opened up about where we are. I've opened up here and said shit on here that I never thought I would say. Yeah. Because we're talking about it and someone's sharing with me and I'm sharing with them. And the way you spoke about journaling, and there's something about writing it out and getting out of yourself and talk therapy. I mean, even me expressing my needs, my anxieties, the issues I have from my childhood. I've mentioned those in a few. Just that expression and getting it out of yourself is incredible, because so much, the way that I perceive it is, so much of our energy is utilized keeping that under wraps and showing a stable, quote, stable facade that's got everything going for them, or everything is at least normal. But then when you express it, it's like, okay, here's my foundation. I said the quiet part out loud. Here's my foundation. This is really where I am. Now you're not using energy to hold all that down, and you're really being, it's getting cliche, but authentically yourself, because you've shared, you've gotten that out of you. So whether it's writing or talking, just getting that negative energy out of you so that it doesn't cycle within you is just amazing. It's incredible.
Yeah. It really is. And, I say healing doesn't happen in silence or solitude. And, it pains me, like truly pains me, that people don't think that they can speak up. And it's quite frankly, I don't want to be talking about, trauma all the time. I don't want to live in that space, but I saw so many people who were in that space who are just kind of commiserating. I can tell they're stuck in it. A lot of people identify with their trauma. And to me, one of the absolute worst things about trauma is people feeling like they're suffocating alone. And it's something so scary or so traumatic that you can't even articulate it. I mean, when my husband tried to kill me, I wasn't even going to tell my family. I just wasn't. And that's not healthy, and I can see it objectively. That's part of the thing that writing really helped me do. When you put pen to paper, you're like, holy heck, why am I doing this, that, or the other? I mean, to me, as a lifelong people pleaser, subjugating my dreams and goals and everything else, it's just utterly ludicrous to me that we would live our lives for other people. It's just not rational, but the trauma psyche is not rational. And that's one of the reasons why I'm very open about, again, the stuff that I'm not proud of, the behaviors that I engaged in. I talk about it throughout the book because I just really want people to understand, we're trying to rationalize the irrational, and the trauma psyche is just not rational. And we need to appreciate the subconscious and how we can, access that to change those things. I mean, I lived my life like, Pinocchio, letting people play, any puppeteer could play with my strings. And then when they no longer, needed to toy with me anymore, I'd be discarded and put back on the shelf. So I was letting myself be treated as a means to an end. And of course, I was projecting my worth as a means to an end. So of course I ended up with a lot of needy people, because I needed to be needed. And, that's one thing I wish everyone would realize, is that their worth is intrinsic. And I think that, there's a lot of low self-esteem and low self-worth. And I think that's part of the reason why People go to the doctors, people go to the therapists because they don't think that they have the answers. They don't think that they could do it on their own, because a lot of us really don't have, the confidence and sense of self that's really what we need to live a holistically healthy, long, fulfilling life.
It's hard work. That's the biggest thing I came away with, and just sharing about myself on here and being that open, is you have fear in your life, and the only thing you have to fear is fear itself. Another famous quote, huge cliche, but to me it makes sense, because just the anticipation of something typically is worse than, or more powerful, whether better or worse, than when you get to whatever it is that happens or whatever it is that plays out. So for me, I've been saying since I opened up a couple months ago on the series, where it's kind of like we fear so many things in life, but it's like nothing scared me more than opening up my past and seeing these quirks, these habits. Where do they come from? Tracing that cord back to the wall. Where did that start? Why am I like this? Why do I have certain insecurities or anxieties, whatever? The scariest thing in life for me is looking, aside from life or death situations. Obviously, that's the next level. But there's nothing scarier than opening up yourself to see your most vulnerable and transparent forms as a little kid. That's what I see. When you look in the past, it's like you're looking at this unsupported child that's scared, and it still impacts who we are today. So it's a lot of work, because it is scary. It takes some courage to really, okay, let's open up that can and see what's in there that's causing all of this behavior in the here and now. So it's been a powerful experience speaking those things out, and then really considering where in the past they came from.
Yeah, I think it takes a lot of self-reflection, and, our brains are wired to where we like the familiar, even if it's familiar misery, familiar hell. People don't like getting out of their comfort zone, because, the brain is in survival mode. It wants to recognize patterns, and it doesn't like, it gets anxious if the pattern's unfamiliar, even if it's for the best. And I think until we can appreciate that kind of stuff, we're going to be really hesitant to do that work. I always thought I was blissfully ignorant, but yet, and I was always happy throughout life and optimistic. But again, I was being misdiagnosed with so many things because my body kept screaming to me like, hey, knock, knock, knock. I used to have horrible dreams. And I always called them dreams, because intuitively I knew that they were like symptoms, they were trying to send me a message that I needed to address something. I was like, I feel completely safe. Why am I having these Stephen King-like bizarre movies? It was because, my subconscious was saying, hey, you need to pay attention to this. So I think it's great the more of us who talk about things, because, there's like a taboo around trauma. And again, childhood is so impactful for good or bad. And until we start, realizing that, we're not going to change. And again, for people to not feel like they're alone and that there's someone who truly understands them, I think that can make the world a better place, quite honestly.
Yeah, everybody has their own stuff. Everybody has their own path, their own reactions. I'm just sharing mine is kind of like, ever since I opened up that view, that window into my past and where those things came from, and recognizing, okay, this kid didn't have this that they needed or that they needed, so that's why I'm like this now. Not leaving it in the past, but now I have an understanding of that. Once you open up that window into your past and face yourself and what it might be, right? It does free you up in the present to a certain degree, because you may be fighting an internal fight you're not even aware of. To put it in another way, I think you've been saying that the whole time we've been talking. Fighting an internal battle you know nothing about. You're just kind of going through the motions of life, reacting to everything, suppressing the trauma. But when you get to that point where you can't open it up, whether it is talk therapy, whether it is journaling, I've done neither of those, but I've heard great things, or face it by yourself and talk to friends about it and whoever it may be. There's something about when you face it, and you do some of the work or all of the work or the ongoing work, there's something about that you're not suppressing that, you're not fighting it, you're not using energy to do that, and it frees you in the present moment with a different kind of freedom to move forward. a different kind of energy, a different kind of perception, a different kind of lens. It's incredible.
Yeah, no, that's extremely well articulated. It really is liberating and empowering. And something that you just mentioned that I would really like to make a point of, we're both saying that to each his or her own, and we're not judging, talk therapy. Instrumental to my life has been, my best friends. I don't think we should bottle it up. I do think we should be talking to somebody. And I hope increasingly more and more people are comfortable doing that, because that's really been transformative to my life. And, I'm sure a lot of other people feel like I do, that, my best friends, especially from childhood, knew me way better than I knew myself. So, and to open up, I have a couple of YouTube channels, and I used to think that affirmations were like, woo-woo or Saturday night skits, like look in the mirror, I'm beautiful, I'm wealthy, I'm a princess. Yeah. And then all of a sudden that's supposed to manifest. And now I understand it more. Although I think we still need to, you could do affirmations from here till kingdom come, and unless you're accessing that on a subconscious level.
Yeah. There's a lot more that goes on. It's a great starting point, but it's not as easy, as straightforward as,
It's necessary, but not sufficient. And so I actually, and they're very vulnerable moments. And I was videoing for myself, and then I put them on my YouTube channel because, to this day, if I say these things, I feel it gutturally that, that I am worthy, that I'm not a means to an end. And just the recognition that that's how you've been living your life, which is, the end result of doing that introspection, that hard but necessary introspection. I'm just like bawling on those, but it's not sad. It's a release. It's an actual release. So I'm no longer tethered to the past, which is exactly what craniosacral therapy did for me without me even understanding it, because it helped me segregate from my 5-year-old self to my adult self. I wasn't that scared little girl anymore. And it's funny, the debut novel, my Mediterranean-based series, Sicilian Seductions, there's a little girl in it, GiGi, and this is the origin of me naming the not-for-profit GiGi's Angels. I didn't realize it until after I'd written my memoir and after I wrote the novel, that GiGi's me, little me. And so, again, talk about being cathartic.
Yeah. When you were talking about affirmations and, the things, if you do affirmations, if you carry them out, if you say them, those repetitions on a regular basis. And I'm reading this book by Jason Wilson, and the man that the moment demands. And Jason has written about trauma to men. He mostly writes to men from a kind of a religious background, but it's not all religion. That's just what influences him. And a lot of it has to do with the violence that he grew up with in Detroit, why men, Black men in that culture keep things to themselves, the traumas that they've gone through. But at the end of, I've read 2 of his books. I just finished the second book. But what's interesting about the affirmations is at the end of each chapter, he has an exercise for men to do. It's 3 different exercises or 3 different considerations, but the last one is now pick up a mirror, look in the mirror, and say these 5 things to yourself. And the 5 things at the end of each chapter are tied to that chapter itself. So each chapter, there's always 5 different things to say to yourself. And whenever I first heard about looking in the mirror and talking to yourself, I don't think I've tried, but when I have looked in the mirror, I'm like, what does that seem? What does it seem like? What does it feel like to talk to yourself? And most of us have heard, listen, if you're going through something, talk to yourself the way you would talk to somebody else through it.
Yeah.
Going back to that mirror thing, it's like when you look in the mirror and you're not brushing your teeth, you're not doing your hair, you're looking at yourself. You never have those opportunities. You're not going through life the way you would look at your kids, your spouse, your boyfriend, your friend. You don't see yourself that often really looking at yourself. It's always aesthetic to shave, to brush your teeth, but you're never really looking at yourself.
You don't expose yourself.
No. So in you talking about affirmations, Jason Wilson having those affirmations in the mirrors, and he says, all right, go get your mirror for 60 seconds. Don't look away. Look at the man in the mirror. Say these 5 things to yourself. Like I said, I haven't done it yet, but I can see why it would work because you don't see yourself. It sounds simplistic, but you don't see yourself that often. Like that's
Right.
Like your existence, you don't see yourself until you look in a mirror intentionally and see the person that's looking back at you.
Well, and we have, I think we have like about 70,000 thoughts a day, and like 70% of them are negative, and we don't even realize that. So, I don't do it in the mirror per se, but if I say I am worthy, if you feel something weird in your gut when you're saying that, that's highlighting an issue that you need to address. And I think that that's part of what the beauty is of doing something like Jason suggests, because it makes you confront that when normally you're not even aware of it, or you're suppressing it, or like me, you're blissfully ignorant. And if there's anything that you want to change about in your life, if you don't know why you're doing what you're doing, you're not going to be able to change it. And that's where I think affirmations are, a necessary but not sufficient step. And it helps us identify those things that we need to change if we want to live the life that we want to and live authentically. I think a nurse had written a book on what people, in hospice or before they die, what they say. And I think that they said the greatest regret is not having lived an authentic life, which again, logically and in the abstract seems utterly ludicrous, just ludicrous. But so many of us are doing that.
Yeah, I kind of smiled before when you were talking about, seeing yourself. And it goes back to like, when I'm telling my kid not to do something and they keep doing it, I'm like, look at me. Look at me. And you lock eyes and you like, stop doing that. So there's a major difference between them hearing it the way I would hear something if I say it to myself, and them turning to me, looking me in the eye, knowing I mean fucking business.
And being present,
and being present. So there's something about if you do those exercises in the mirror, locking eyes and really seeing yourself, physically, seeing yourself, because there is power in saying it without a mirror, but it's amazing how often we don't look at each other for that reason, aside from all the aesthetic stuff. But Sophia, go ahead. Go ahead.
Say that's a good point. Even if we're uncomfortable with the conversation vis-a-vis somebody else, like you don't want eye contact. It's the same that you don't want the contact with yourself. And talk therapy. That's one of the reasons why I think that can be very helpful, but not sufficient, because like affirmations or whatever it is, whether it's my diet, my exercise, there are things that you need to do, healthy habits you need to do on a daily basis to truly get over things. And going to therapy, check once a week or once a month or whatever it is, you have to do the day-to-day work and the, inwards intervention.
Absolutely. So Sophia, does it make sense from your childhood that this is what you're doing? This is where you are? Not that you knew you were going to end up at this point, but can you reconcile?
Oh yes, it makes perfect sense. It's coming full circle to where my little self knew authentically what I wanted, but I suppressed that and I didn't follow it. And now I'm at the point to where I am following it. Again, I always had a curious spirit, wanted to be a teacher and a psychologist. So, it fits perfectly. I wanted to travel. I'm enthralled with neuroplasticity. I can't stand routine. I love every day is different. I learn things constantly. My curiosity is always piqued. I feel like I have 9 lives. And so, yes, it completely syncs with, had I lived authentically from that age, it's exactly what I would have been doing. And that's it's a big part of my message for people to hopefully live unapologetically, authentically, with compassion. I think, people seem to think like living your life for yourself is selfish. I think most of us, not all of us, but most of us need to be more selfish. Which is the only way to have holistic health, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, you can almost say just because I'm selfish with myself doesn't mean I'm selfish with you.
Right. I mean, like, my love is limitless.
It's not taking away from you.
Exactly. I can love myself. That doesn't mean that I have any less love for everybody else. It's love is limitless. So
and I think when you are selfish, you do become a better person for everybody else.
Right. And and you lead by example. I know a lot of children grow up. I modeled myself after my mom. She subjugated all of her life. And I used to think of her, she was like a martyr. I thought of her as a hero. In grade school, when you have to write about your hero, I wrote about my mom. And when I started having all these flashbacks, I'm like, holy heck, I'm my mom, because I I was modeled that love was conditional. I was modeled that, self-sacrifice and subjugation is what you did for love. My parents, my father was extraordinarily jealous. Even like my mom would, as an adult, my mom would sing to me that song, "You Are My Sunshine," and she had to stop because he got that upset that she was singing it to me. And, I would be in different relationships where the boyfriend or whatever would be, kind of psychotically jealous. And I would have friends be like, whoa, this isn't healthy. And I never batted an eye, because if you have trauma, things that people objectively think are red flags could be green flags, because I was modeled that was love. Crazy jealousy. And again, now I realize that rationally that, that's not the case at all. But we grow up having these things modeled for us, and we're programmed like that. And I think, again, that's one of the reasons why the introspection and the affirmations are so key to healing, because you need to be aware of why you're doing whatever it is that you're doing, and then tackle head on what it is that you want to change.
So you've mentioned many of them, many powers, but what do you consider your superpower? What is your ultimate thing that you bring to the table?
I would say my open heart and my optimism. And again, even, throughout my memoir, I said that I didn't want to write a book about abuses. I wanted to show that despite those traumatic blips, that I was always, happy and optimistic. And I talk a lot about friendships and earth angels throughout all of my books, because, it's the people that really help buoy you, at your lowest, and they inflate you or deflate you, whichever one you need at the right time. And I know a lot of people who have gone through a lot of stuff, who have closed their hearts off. And I'm full of life, love, zest. And to me, that would not be a way to live. And so I'm really glad that instead of getting bitter, I've tried to get better and turn my knowledge, my insights into the passion to try to help other people, so that they don't go down the same trajectory that I did for as long as I did. And, again, with optimism, there's always, like Buddhism says, that perceptions are responsible for 95% of our suffering. And just having an optimistic outlook, we all know that things are going to happen to us. We're all going to have challenges, etc. But, to look at them as opportunities, turning adversity into something better, to grow from it, to become stronger. I write a lot about my inspirational heroes throughout my books, which include people like Nelson Mandela and the Dalai Lama and Helen Keller, people who have taken serious, personal strife and challenges, and led by example, and only got, better. They didn't just persevere, they truly thrived. I actually hate the term survivor for people of childhood, or for whatever, because that really just kind of imparts barely escaping, with your life. And that's why, in my first book, I call myself the Naked Conqueror, because I'm so vulnerable. And I really wanted it to be my history. You conquer someone in war, it's your history, so they're no longer tethered to it. And surviving puts too much importance on the abuse, the perpetrator, the incident. And I think that defines you as just the person who survived this. And almost like everything that happens after the survival doesn't matter. This is who the person is. They survived whatever circumstance, and that's it. Yeah, people identify with their they identify with their trauma. And, a lot of people have a victim mentality. And, that to me, you're not likely to live the life you really would optimally want to live if you're shackled by your past, you're imprisoned by it. Yeah. Sophia, what does leadership mean to you? Before we jump into the book, I'm a leadership coach, so I'd be remiss if I didn't ask. So how do you define leadership? What does great leadership look like to you? Yeah, I think I just alluded to it insofar as what personally resonates with me the most is people who have had to go through, significant events, and they embrace them with, optimism, and courage and bravery. And then, lead by example by not only having traversed through it and coming out, better for that, but then share their inspiration and insights to help model a path for others going forward. Beautiful. Thank you. And now at this point, we can jump into your book if you want. Why don't you introduce the book, the full title, and tell us how the book came to be? Okay. It's Sicilian Seductions, a Mediterranean love affair. Happily Ever Now, A Soul Journey of an Open Heart. And again, it's the debut novel in my Mediterranean-based series, largely modeled after my life, but without, the darkness of murder attempts and suicide and childhood abuse, etc. So the protagonist, Sophia, goes through a bad marriage, and she's like, I'm out of here, and she books a one-way ticket to Sicily. And it's kind of like a healing journey, and told in a more entertaining, lighthearted way, but it still touches on, you can see she takes one step forward and two steps back, and she's struggling because, she wants a romantic relationship, but she's fearful because of the heartache from the past, but she keeps moving on with an open heart and an open mind, and really exploring the simple pleasures of life, which is one of the favorite parts to me of the Mediterranean culture. Like thinking you've lost everything and finding out that your life is more enriched because you're really focused on what really matters in life. And it kind of ends with a cliffhanger, but hence when I first started writing, I thought that I was going to write one book and I would be done a few years ago. And again, now it's going to be 9 books, and I'm just trying to finish the 6th one.
So obviously you've spoken about the Mediterranean. Can you break that down a little bit for us? What when you first explored the Mediterranean, what have you learned about the Mediterranean? Give us a kind of a behind the curtain view on, because you keep bringing it up. It's important to you. It stands out. Tell us a little bit more about that.
And, I've been basically based, living and traveling throughout the Mediterranean for the past couple of decades. But even, my initial exposure to other cultures, like I said, when I started traveling to South America a lot with work, and I fell in love with Argentina too. So even though my exposure is primarily with the Mediterranean, it's just a lot of other cultures, whether it's Asia,
Can you give us a walkthrough of your experience in the Mediterranean? You said you've been to these. So maybe in chronological order, how you ended up in certain places.
So when I first, after my husband tried to kill me, I took a couple of months off and I started traveling, and I was spending time in Italy. And that's when it really struck me that people, there's like the work to live versus live to work. I just saw a completely different culture, a different perspective, emphasis on simple pleasures instead of happiness coming from capitalism and your position, your title, your salary, who has the biggest car, the biggest house, the biggest this, that, and the other. It was just really spoke to me. And it's funny because I had inklings since, going to Argentina, but it's certainly become how I feel, that I feel like I belong, for instance, more in Turkey than I ever did anywhere in the United States. And that's coming from, I'm not Muslim. The majority is clearly Muslim. As a single older woman alone in a Muslim country where I don't speak the language, and yet I felt at home. And I think that, home is truly where the heart is. And just the day-to-day life, the camaraderie, the sociability throughout all the countries, Spain, France, the civility. I've spent a lot of time in all those countries, and I was in France, and I'm always just struck by the civility. I mean, if you go into any shop, it's as if you're entering someone's home. Like, you do not go in without greeting, the proprietor, and they greet you. And, in Turkey, when people ask you how you are, it's not rhetorical. They want to know. They truly want to know. The culture. So
what is it about Turkey? A little more beyond what you've shared. What is it that stands out in Turkey versus the other countries you visited?
Well, I think that, fundamentally, they all have the same underpinning that fundamentally speaks to me. I think in Turkey in particular, I was just blown away by the natural beauty. I've been blessed to travel, throughout the world, and there's nowhere more beautiful than the village that I have primarily been based in. So there's the natural beauty, there's, living outside, my soul needs nature. I call it vitamin N, and I can really tell when I'm not getting, my nature fix. And then also just the hospitality. I think particularly, the tolerance and the warmth of the people, despite being so different, despite having the religious differences. That is self-evident to me. And I think it's something that's sorely missing in a lot of places. And I love how no matter what the diversity is, there's that sincere hospitality. I remember, a couple of times, like I would be walking and, I'm not dressed whatever, but I'd have on, sports shorts and there would be women covered from head to toe, didn't know me. And they're, sitting on the sidewalk and they're having a picnic, insisting that I join them, despite, not knowing me, the language barrier, the way I was dressed compared to the way they were. There's a sincerity. I get emotional talking about it because I think a lot of people have misconceptions. And, like I'd walk into a butcher and, they'd be eating something and would jump up immediately to share with me. It's a very sharing, loving country. Like there's stray dogs and cats all over there taken care of by the locals and the government. Children are revered. They have so many festivals where they're, in total focus on the children. The children, people grow up with more of a sufficiency, which I think also translates into greater sense of self-esteem, as well as, being more independent, being able to take care of yourself, not being coddled. Different perspective, I feel like, on stress, focus on sociability and multi-generational support and friendship support, and the cafe culture, which is pervasive throughout Europe. Instead of like someone running into the corner coffee store here, either grab their coffee or to sit there in front of their laptop and work. These things are ingrained in their daily rituals, like aperitivo time in Italy. It's a very sociable occasion. Like people will be gathered all evening long and they'll just have one drink and no one's like trying to turn tables and rush them out. It'd be uncouth to do that. It would be uncivil. In Turkey, you don't walk by anyone if they're eating, even if you don't know them, you wish them, like good meal, good health. It's just a different, slower paced, simpler pleasures, sincerity. It just, it's grabbed a hold of my heart years ago and it never let go.
So when it comes to your first international foray was into Argentina. How did you end up going over to the Mediterranean, to that area?
Oh, good question. So I was with one of the narcissist boyfriends and I had spent time in Europe before, and we went to Spain and Greece and Italy. And then I got called back to do a consulting job, and I was just about to go to Santorini. And so I came back to the United States, did whatever work, and then I headed off again. And that's where I met my second husband, was in Santorini, and then was pretty much based there, since then. Again, just fell in love with, people always ask me which is my favorite country, and it's really hard to say because there are differences in each country where I like, certain things more than others. But definitely that, what I would call a Mediterranean vibe, largely the authenticity, the slower pace, and the simple pleasures, which is what really speaks to my soul.
Yeah, it's funny. I was talking to my father-in-law last weekend. They stopped by, a little impromptu stop by. His culture, his parents are from Greece. They're immigrants. He's first generation. I'm first generation. My parents are from Colombia. And we were talking about just that difference, and somebody mutual that we know, not really kind of understanding our appreciation for our respective cultures. So as you're talking about your experiences in Turkey and how people look out for each other and they wish each other a good meal, or you walk into a store and store owner or the proprietor jumps up, or it's kind of like the conversation with my father-in-law, where that's kind of the vibe that we kind of carry ourselves because of that immigrant mentality of our parents. Like, they came here for a better life. They worked hard to provide for, our siblings, for us. And now we are one generation further ahead of them, living in America, but we still have those tendencies. So as you were talking about those little tendencies, those little things in Turkey, to me, it's kind of like, yeah, that's what it's about. Community. When I go back to visit my family in Colombia, like, you have a sense of community, whether it's the music. He and I were talking, it's like the music, the food, the booze, the dancing, just kind of
celebration of life. Daily.
That's exactly what I said to him. There and other places, there seems to be that celebration of life. My family always apologizes that they don't have, the biggest house, that they consider themselves poor, and they apologize left and right, everybody, all of them. And then they're all sitting outside. They're all waving to people walking by. They all know everybody in their neighborhood. There's music playing everywhere. They're drinking their like exactly what you said. And then I would fly home, and then we're all in our houses. We don't have people in the neighborhood are friendly, but there's one extra level of community when you go to other countries. So I have a deep appreciation for that. I just realized that in talking to my father-in-law, trying to infuse that in my way of being. Like wherever I am, I try to speak to a stranger. I try to be friendly, just to kind of infuse that. And as you were talking about Turkey, I was thinking about America, my area, and I'm like, yeah, we don't do that. You were talking about, we go to a coffee shop, and I pictured myself going to the coffee shop, and you said, and we sit in front of our laptop, and there I was in front of my laptop, and no one really says hi to each other. No one says hi. No one really looks up. It's kind of like, heads down and just doing our thing.
I thought about that the other day. I was just walking by somebody, and it was clear that I'm just so used to saying hi, to strangers or whatever.
Yeah.
And, even with when I was going to Argentina, that started. I moved there for a while, but it started off with work, and that sense of like they would be business meetings, but we would have 4-hour dinners, and people really wanted to talk to people, like. Interact with people, and community was an excellent way of putting it. And to me, it makes, again, it's a celebration of life each day. I remember when I went to Spain several years ago, and unemployment, especially with the younger people, was just rampant. And, I would see all these people, I'd be like walking home at 9, and they'd all be going out in groups because, that's what life is. It doesn't, and to that end, if people are stressed about not having a job or whatever, doesn't it actually make more sense to be hanging out with your friends instead of sitting in your bedroom depressed at home? So they just have a different perspective on life. And I mean, Spain in particular, like I've never seen people who live in the moment, as much as they do. And that energy, especially with my work with heart coherence, the energy truly is contagious. It's infectious.
It is. Yes. Perfect words. And what's funny is people have said to me, hey, when you're on these conversations on your series, you just seem like it just seems natural to you. It's not like I try to remind myself never to call it an interview, because it never is. I don't want it to be. The questions are there, the standard questions, but it's mostly a conversation. And just in real time right now, just like this conversation with you, I realize that's where that comes from. So when people see that here, and you and I have never met. You and I have never met face to face. One of us reached out to the other. We got to know each other. We found out about each other's work. You told me about your novel. I'm like, yeah, there are lessons in there for leadership. Come on. We'll do a conversation. But this is my culture. This is what it's about. Like if you have somebody in front of you, what are they about? Let's enjoy life. Even if you're talking about the hardships of life and trauma and your past and trying to work forward,
which could be very uncomfortable.
This is somebody in your human community. I mean, it sounds hokey, but that's to me, that's what I see when I see somebody pop up on screen. It's somebody I don't know, but it's like, all right, let's live life together in this moment, in this hour and a half. Let's get to know each other, enjoy it. It's not going to be, hopefully it's not a fucking chore to anybody that comes on, but that's what I want to do, is just enjoy. It's like if we were at a cafe or something, it really is breaking bread with a fellow human being in this race we call life.
Yeah, no, the breaking bread reference, is excellent. It really is community and connection. And, again, like these, I've actually found through doing a lot of podcasts, because, I'm introverted, and to talk about myself to start with, and then to talk about trauma could be very unpleasant. And, you make it so engaging. It really is like we're just having a discussion. And, in the United States, oftentimes, if you run into someone, it's going to be like, oh, what do you do for work? How's the weather? Maybe a sports team.
They ask the question, and then their eyes kind of like go somewhere else. Like, it's not really, I want to know about you. Yes.
Yeah. How are you? How's your family? And they don't.
How was your day at work? And it's just that script of check-ins, and that's it.
Well, because everyone's, most people's days are just so routinized, and nothing, I can't tell you how many people tell me, like, nothing's new, same old.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've had those conversations. You have those conversations. People ask, "How's everything going?" And you say, "Nothing new," but
Mm-hmm.
or I'll speak to, yeah, it's tough. I
Mm-hmm.
coaching my kids' team, and work is kind of hectic. Like I open it
Yeah.
up that I'm
Yes.
human. I have shit going on too,
Yes.
where it's not like, oh, everything's good, everything's solid, everything's moved. Like sometimes it is like a little bit of transparency so that we can show
Right.
each other I'm
Yeah. The
human
human
too.
side, right. The connection.
Exactly. Sophia, so what lessons do you hope people take from this book? Again, yes, it's a novel, but I've had novels on here for with my guests. So I believe that even in a novel, there's some kind of lesson that people can take away. What kind of general lesson would you present from your novel, and then what kind of lesson for leadership? Because even a novel, even though it's fiction, there's something in there I think people can take away for both life in general and leadership.
Yeah, I would think, in general that, embrace the magic that happens with uncertainty. Again, like something being mundane, the extraordinary does not happen in the ordinary. And I think for leadership, I would say, to be authentic, don't be so fixated on how, be more transparent. Don't be so fixated on how other people are going to view you. There too, get out of your comfort zone, and realize that you can learn so much by truly listening, kind of like what we were just talking about with the different cultures.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people who are in, managerial situations, it's more of a one-way communication where it should be bi-directional, more listening. That's one of the things that heart coherence also teaches, which is interesting. So many of us are already thinking of the next thing we're going to say instead of listening to the other human, whether that's in a professional context or in a personal context. And, just embrace the simple pleasures of life and live authentically, because, that to me is really the prescription for happiness.
Yeah, it's interesting. You had mentioned at one point in our conversation today, loneliness. There is that epidemic of loneliness in the US. And I just, again, in real time, just talking about the culture that informed my way of being on this series. And then it got me thinking about the times in my life where I felt that loneliness was certain points in my life was that I wasn't living like this, living with curiosity, living with learning about somebody new. I was kind of just maybe stuck in a rut, stuck in the script of life and career, time to make the donuts kind of thing. But it has to be more proactive than that. You have to really get out. And there's such a, it sounds like common sense. You're in your town. Maybe you don't go anywhere too often, but there's such an amazing world out there of people, of places, countries, whatever it may be. There's so much more out there. If you feel that sense of loneliness, of that sense of being stuck, like you said, you got to get outside of your comfort zone, try something new. So I just realized that those moments in my life where I felt like that, and I had my friends, but there was just something missing. And now that I'm able to do this regularly, this helps me get that energy out there. I think that's what it is, that cultural aspect of really engaging with somebody, especially somebody new, learning about them, learning about life through them and their story.
Yeah, I think that, I've read statistics that loneliness, social isolation, I think that accounts for more deaths than like obesity and smoking put together, or something really, really tragic. And, the other thing I would recommend to people, if they do feel like they're alone, there are always places to get help. I have found a lot of passion and a purpose, trying to help others. So whether it's volunteering, whether it's hanging out with animals, or volunteering at an animal shelter, or for me, nature. Nothing cures my mindset better than nature.
It may sound counterintuitive, but there were times where I felt like that, and I got out in nature and I was alone. But when you get somewhere where it's like awe-inspiring, where you realize like the world is much bigger than your little pocket that you're in, there's something about that wakes you up to the possibilities of what can be. You get out of your normal, regular environment and you get out there and you just see kind of the beautiful canvas that is nature or a park. For me, it's the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
But seeing something beyond the ordinary, I think we got to mix up what we're seeing if we're not feeling quite right.
Yeah. And, the other, I think a huge antidote to loneliness, which might not sound so magical to a lot of people, is through books. I mean, it's an escape mechanism, but also hopefully it opens your heart, your eyes, your mind, exposes you, to new things. And, I think that's an excellent way to counteract that, periodic feelings of loneliness.
So, Sophia, we're here for your book, but what's a book that's impacted you? Is there one that stands out that you would come back on the series to discuss that really stands out for you?
Oh, yes, for sure. I mean, there would actually be a few of them: The Art of Happiness by Dalai Lama, Long Walk to Freedom by Nelson Mandela, and The Story of My Life by Helen Keller. And I'd be hard pressed to pick, but the Art of Happiness has pretty much been like my spiritual Bible ever since, my first ex, when I was really struggling with stuff. And books have really, really been so integral to my mental health and well-being, and just the perspective. I was shocked at how the wisdom is so practical and applicable to everybody, regardless of what your spirituality is. I think that there are a lot of, good insights in there. And also, I would be remiss not to mention in my memoir, a book that was hugely integral to my healing. So if anyone's looking for a resource, was How to Do the Work by the holistic psychologist, Dr. Nicole LaPera, because she kind of helped give me the framework of delving into the origin of my struggles, and then suggested some insights. And actually in my memoir, I go through that a lot and how I used that. And so the reason why I want to bring that up is because, again, if people don't know where to start, I would start with a book, whether it's a fiction book or, something like a spiritual book or simply a psychology book, whatever it is. We can get so much help, from the written word. And it's seriously, books change lives. And I know that they certainly have mine.
Yeah, it's interesting. I speak about those moments where I felt that loneliness, and I've spoken about my anxiety on here before, anxiety I've felt all my life. And the way that they affect your body is very similar. Mm-hmm. And although I've never read to get away from, not get away, but to help with loneliness, sometimes when I'm anxious and I don't feel like working out, or I don't feel like playing music, or I don't feel like writing any of that stuff, if my desired way to kind of alleviate that anxiety is reading, it's incredible what it does. Yes, it's a distraction, but depending on what you're reading, you're learning, you're in somebody else's mindset, you're in somebody else's thoughts, their approach. Again, learning from somebody else, kind of, it's a distraction away from yourself, but it does show you the possibilities of what can be, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. Right. So I love that suggestion.
Inspiration. And I think, it's one of the things that scares me with social media, which to me, I think is disconnecting a lot more people than it's bringing them together. And so many people get like bite-sized information instead of just reading. And I'm old school. I like having, the physical book in my hand, taking notes in it, etc. It truly is one of life's simple pleasures as far as I'm concerned, and yet so impactful.
Absolutely. Sophia, in wrapping up, what are you up to these days? Is there anything I didn't ask that you want to share? Anything you want to share with the listeners and the viewers about what you have going on or what you have coming up? Anything at all? The floor is yours. I'm continuing to write my books. I have a national book tour starting in Chicago in a couple of weeks, and I'm doing that, kicking it off in May, in particular for Mental Health Awareness Month, and having silent auctions with proceeds going to Feeding America affiliates. Again, like finding passion and purpose from whatever's happened to you in your life. I feel like it's truly heartwarming to me. I'm working on a screenplay for the novel, which I'm pretty excited about. Awesome. And then, just writing. Honestly, I wish I could just write and, not have to market anything, but I have endless books in me. So
going to start writing travel guides more, really exposing people to, the beauty. I mean, this was a very insightful conversation for me with you, identifying what it is about those different cultures that really, really speak to us. And I think that, the world would be a different place if we all adopted some of those cultural insights, if you will.
Yeah. Again, I mean, in just discovering it in real time, where my affinity for that kind of approach to people comes from. And that's what it is. It's my parents' culture, where your community, your neighborhood, they're your family. I mean, these are people that are going to affect your environment, your ecosystem. So it's kind of like subconscious, where I'm going to put out the good energy that I want to exist.
Right.
And again, it sounds like common sense. Maybe it was common sense. Maybe I should have known it, but I really did make that connection in real time here with you in this conversation. So I appreciate that.
Oh, that's awesome.
And again, Sophia's own book is Sicilian Seductions, a Mediterranean Love Affair. And that's her debut novel of the Mediterranean-based Happily Ever Now series, A Soul Journey of an Open Heart. Sophia, thank you so much for this conversation.
My pleasure. Absolutely. Thank you.
And if there's anything that I might have missed, anything I should have asked, we're limited on time. I go down rabbit holes. If there's anything that stood out as anything I should have requested or asked or spoken about, let me know. I'll reach out to Sophia, see what kind of additional insights, guidance, knowledge, wisdom I can get. In the meantime, thank you for watching and thank you for listening. I'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.